All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is a great day for us to welcome the incredible Canadian artist, Rita Leistner. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly? That's good.
You
That's what I
are.
thought. Who uses photography as well as documentary filmmaking to create portraits of communities in very, very extreme communities. As I hope you were able to see in the film link that she shared, that she'll be talking about here. But she's also worked in areas where she documented soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan, female patients in psychiatric hospitals in wartime, women wrestlers in the US, and loggers and tree planters in Canada, exploring these themes of purpose, struggle, and belonging. Each unique world shapes her conceptual approaches and aesthetic styles, resulting in distinctive, large bodies of work, to say the least. They're immensely huge bodies of work, I would say. And you definitely merge art and documentary. That the platforms and the deliverables, or however you like to describe how her work gets out into the world, is usually in the form of exhibitions and books and films. And Rita is well known for spending huge swaths of time on her projects, which really allows her to embed in the communities of which she documents, often spending months, if not years, on her various projects that are very, very powerful. She has made, how many films have you made?
Well, just the one feature film and a short.
So two films. I
Yeah,
just
and
know the
then a number of books, like a giant
yeah, and a
multimedia
number of books.
project. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
especially the
multimedia, but not film up until a certain point.
got it, got it, got it. The book that she did around the tree planters is stunningly beautiful. It's 256 pages, and then she also has large scale fine art photographs that go along with it as well. Rita's writing and photographs have been published in literally thousands of platforms, magazine, books, online, all manners of digital media around the world. She's been exhibited in more than 20 countries, and her work it is collected in major art collections, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Canadian War Museum, Image Central at Toronto Metropolitan University, and the TD Bank Art Collection. That's super interesting. Rita has written about photography, art, and war for publications such as the Routledge Companion to Visual Culture, which I have and have read and used in my classes, Rita, the
Hmm.
Literary Review of Canada, Geo France, and also the Walrus. And again, she's published 4 books of photography, including Unembedded, which is a whole nother story in and of itself, for independent photojournalists on the war in Iraq, which is still today widely considered one of the most influential anti-war books to come out of the Iraq conflict. She's been an associate professor of the history of photojournalism and documentary photography at the University of Toronto. She has been held hostage by insurgents. She's been assaulted, shot at, has run into gunfire to get a photograph as well, which I can relate to. And then during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, Rita continued her explorations of community struggle and belonging in 2 photography series about the human desire for connection in the face of strict pandemic rules. I think that you are going to be just completely enraptured by her presentation from the slides that she just kind of rolled through very quickly for me to see. And I want to also thank the Associated Students of Foothill College for sponsoring this talk, and for Rita for taking time out of her very busy day to be here for us. So without any further waiting, Rita Leistner.
Okay.
The
Um,
crowd goes wild.
Thanks for covering the introduction. Yeah, I'm going to try and uh, do what I can in 40 minutes and keep it moving and hopefully interesting and engaging for you. Obviously, I can't go a lot into depth. And, as Judy said, we've both had long careers at this point, and so to tell our whole life stories would that would be really be something. Um, Yeah, it's always interesting to look over my whole life of work and think, oh, how am I going to give a survey of this in 40 minutes? And I thought also because it's Women's History Month that I've got a couple of stories that I did on women's subjects. Of course, just being female photographers, we're already constantly engaged in the competitive world of how to get ahead and how to do this kind of work often considers men's work to work in male-dominated contexts when you're a woman, and also because documentary and photojournalism are both very physical kinds of photography. I mean, this is not being in a studio which can also be physical, but this is really out in the world, as you'll see from the work I show you. That's a big part of it too, is just doing the physical labor that maybe people don't automatically think women are capable of doing. So you really have to get out there and prove the hell out of yourself on a constant basis. And actually, that never that never really stops. Um, so, we all have to start somewhere. And how do you become a visual storyteller unless you have an idea of what tools you're going to use? So for me, the first inkling I had of any kind of visual storytelling was my dad's Rolleiflex camera, which he bought when I was about 3 years old. So he shot this beautiful square format. This is my mom and my sister and me. And skiing will come up again later, alpine skiing. And that's me in the little red hood. And I'm maybe two or so. So, been skiing for as long as I've been walking. And here's me and my sister on my dad's motorcycle. And I'm going to talk more about transportation, which is an ongoing thing as well. Like you have to be able to get places. You have to have an idea of what you want to do. Like my dad was taking pictures of us, and I became intrigued. And the very first camera I ever looked through was one of these Rolleiflex cameras. And you look down through the top, and I would have been like, oh, my dad would show me that. And I knew very early on I wanted to be on the other side of that. And it was, for me, seemed like a way to express myself and still tell stories because that's all we're looking for is from the moment we hit the air, how are we going to express ourselves? And what are the different ways we can do that? And what are the ways that are available to me? Because not everything is going to be available to everyone. And you really have to grab onto the opportunities you have and focus on that and not the opportunities you don't have. Like to speak of the whole women's issue, like you fight and you fight and you fight. And then when you get an opportunity, you grab it and you run with it. And you got to let go of the shit that didn't happen and let go of the people who put you down because that is never going to stop. So letting go is really important and grabbing on and moving forward. So I always wanted to be like, like, oh my God, I'm having a strange, oh my God, what is her name? Lang.
Dorothea.
Dorothea Lang. Dorothea Lang.
It's okay. We
I
do it.
wanted to be like Dorothea Lang, who took this very famous photograph called The Migrant Mother. And there's a story I love about Dorothea Lang in this photograph. And I'm not 100% sure if it's true, but I've read it before and I've retold it. But when she was out and about taking photographs, and she's got to be able to get somewhere. So here's a woman. First of all, she's got a car. Well, she's a woman of means, but she can drive. So she's got to be able to drive. She's got her camera, and she's out driving in the Midwest working on the farm securities, social documentary project. And she's really tired and she's on her way home and she passes this road and she's like, I'm done. I'm too tired. And she gets a couple of miles past it and she says, I'm really wondering what the hell was down that road. So even though she had already passed it and was on her way, she changed her mind and she came back and she drove down that road and she met the family where she took one of the most famous photographs of all time. And I think this idea of like, stopping and you got to go down the road. You got to go to the places like photography is about getting out the door. You're never guaranteed that you're going to find something, but if you don't leave the house, nothing's going to happen. So you're always like on the move. And that was a life I really wanted. I wanted a life on the move. And in between there, but how do you become Dorothea Lange? Especially before the internet. Like you don't know how to research, you can't really research stuff. I ended up doing a master's degree in literary theory. So that 6 years I'm going to represent by this one picture of Umberto Eco's book, A Theory of Semiotics. And I focused on semiotics, many other things. My master's is in French and English comparative literature. And semiotics, which is a study in science of signs, will play an enormous role in who I am as a photographer later, as will my study of languages and literature. So, one of the ways I made money to go through graduate school and and undergraduate school was by planting trees in Canada. So here's a picture of me, also very male dominated. The first year I planted trees, it was me with 12 men on one crew. But here I am with two other women planting trees. And here I am, sort of 10 years into my planting career. I planted for 10 years, sort of getting to look how dirty and rugged my hands are. So, tree planting is widely known as being one of the most difficult physical jobs a human being can do. So, after tree planting, and after having my master's degree in literary theory, I was thinking of becoming a professor of literature, but I'd still had this dream of being Dorothea Lange, you know? And in the interim, like I had a dark room in my bathroom and I processed my own film and I still love photography, but I had no idea how to become a photographer. And I had the opportunity of working in the film industry in Toronto. So this is just a stock photo. I'm not in this photo that I pulled off the internet. And I ended up working for 6 years in the film industry in Toronto as a lighting technician. And that's how I learned, learning a craft, right? But also talk about humility, which you need a lot of to succeed in anything. And so here I was 28 years old, uh, which, that's young, but still, I was 28. I had a master's degree in literary theory. I had planted over 500,000 trees in Canada, and now I was starting at the bottom of the rung in the film industry. And I'll never forget one of my first days on set. So I'm working as a production assistant, making 100 Canadian a day. It's like $70 US a day, working 15-hour days, just flat, right? Just learning, learning, learning. And well, the first day on set, there are all these trucks, because you'd probably see film industry cube vans and trucks driving along. Because I'd worked in tree planting, I knew how to drive a truck. That was part of my job as a tree planter. And so I get to the studio, and there are a bunch of guys there who are even younger than me. So they're like early 20s, and there's me, who they probably thought was old. And this young guy looks at me and he says, "So are you going to set up the craft service table, which is basically snacks and cheese and whatnot?" And so presumably he's going to drive the truck. And I look at him and I say, "What do I look like? I have a special way with cheese." And I'm like, "Give me the keys to the truck. I've got a D license," and I got in the truck. But like jobs like sorting attractive peanuts from unattractive peanuts for commercial shoots, like just the craziest, most menial things. But all of this with my goal of eventually I'll get into the lighting department and I'll get to apprentice and I'll learn a craft. So that's what I did for 6 years. And then about 6 years later, I think to myself, "Hey, what about Dorothea Lange?" Like I'm still not Dorothea Lange. I'm like working on film sets and I'm making a lot of money actually because I was permitting with the union and it was kind of cushy. But, and also doing photography on my own the whole time, studying printing, color printing, being an amateur, but serious amateur photographer all this time, like starting from really junior high school. So now, like, I've already been doing photography as an amateur for more than 20 years. And but that's not what I'm doing as my job. And I was trying desperately to get information on how do you become Dorothea Lange? Like, how do you become a photojournalist or a documentary photographer? And, no one would return my calls. And again, pre-internet, right? No one would talk to me. Finally, a photographer in Toronto by the name of Peter Bragg, he was the staff photographer of our kind of equivalent to Newsweek. Um, uh, it's called uh, not called Maclean's magazine, and he says, "Okay, come on in and talk to me." And I'm like, Peter, how do you become a photojournalist? And he says, "Go where there's news." And literally 3 weeks later, I was living in Cambodia, and this is a picture of me. I don't know if our screen is covering. This is me on a motorcycle in
We can see
Cambodia
it. Yeah, it looks
uh,
great.
driving around with some pals that I met there and hitting the ground running. And actually, this is how I know Judy indirectly because our mutual friend Gretchen Peters, who's also like Judy, an extraordinary journalist and person, and she introduced us not very long ago. That's how I've ended up being here. But Gretchen worked in the media in Cambodia around the same time. Um, and I must have clicked. Okay. So here's me again. Here's me again on my mode of transportation because you got to get around somehow. And I didn't have a lot of money. And here I am with a photographer named Al Rockoff, who I greatly admired. And, he really helped me. Like people help you, right? Like guest lecturers coming to talk to classes like this, there are people out there who will help you. And again, like you accept those helping hands and focus on being grateful for every opportunity you have. And so one of the first things I covered was the elections that were happening at the time. And that was kind of the news item that I thought about. Like, I'm like, well, why don't I go to Cambodia? Because I already actually had kind of a connection to Cambodia and I knew they had these elections coming up. So these are some pictures I was taking in my very, very early days. This was me after photographing one of the first street riots, which is often a part of elections in newly democratic, well, and also famously democratic countries, street demonstrations that were violent sometimes. And I got hit in the head with a brick. And so here I am at a hospital where I'm getting stitches with that's the only camera I had, by the way, for a year and a half. I had that camera and one lens for a year and a half. That's all I had. And here I actually made the news that day, and I'm using this. I love this Google Translate that now I can look at these documents I have in script that I can't read, and you can barely see it, but in the little corner on the far left is like me on an inset. So, anyways, that was early days. So, year and a half in Cambodia. I realize I have a lot to learn. I've still never gone to photography school. So I get an opportunity to study photography in New York at the International Center for Photography. And the first story I do is on women wrestlers. So I'll show you a couple of these pictures of women wrestlers that I made. And I'll tell you, like thinking about opportunity, how did I find out? People always say, how the hell did you get involved in this? Which I spent nearly a year photographing. And I would do any job, and I've always been like that. I've had a lot of bad jobs. And okay, not that assisting is a bad job, but given I'd lived in Cambodia, I had all this background. I'm in New York and I'm willing to do anything to stay and make money. And so I'm assisting on weddings and bar mitzvahs. And I was assisting on a bar mitzvah one day, and it was one of these massive bar mitzvahs with like two videographers and the photographer. I was a wonderful photographer, Karen Marshall, who's still very involved at ICP, and she used a lot of lighting, and she's very, very good at what she did. And she needed assistant. I had lighting experience. So I was doing lighting for Karen, and I'm talking to this videographer, and as one does, so what do you do when you're not shooting bar mitzvahs? And he told me he'd been involved for years with this women's wrestling organization, and that's how I got involved with that through assisting on a bar mitzvah. Again, it's like go out the door and meet people, or nothing's going to happen. So time passes, the war in Iraq is bubbling up, and because I really specifically, even more than Dorothea Lange, although I did become more of a documentary photographer, I wanted to do conflict. I was very interested in history. I'd studied history at school. My uncle was very much into history. He was a mechanic for the Germans during World War II. And he taught us a very healthy mistrust of mass movements and organizations. And I learned a lot about history from him and what I believed of the power of witnessing. And so I thought that I could become this kind of witness through photography. So I went to Iraq. It wasn't easy either. I walked to Iraq. These are some of the smugglers who I walked through the mountains with because I couldn't get a military embed because who was I? I wasn't anybody. And so I walked to Iraq. It took me 3 days and 3 nights. And I ended up doing a story about Kurdish community. We met sort of related to this going through the mountains, which I did with Kurdish smugglers. I did a really long two 2.5 month in bed with a cavalry unit that was totally unofficial. I just met them basically on a street corner and started living. It's a very long story, but the Walrus magazine invited me to do photos and text. So I wrote this massive feature story. And again, because of my background in writing, like I could write a big feature story. And because I didn't have to rely on being with writers all the time to get the story, I I could do it on the cheap because I could live in the desert with these soldiers and eat MRIs and have no expenses because it's just me and I could be there for months and months and no one even knew that I existed, and then I would come out of it and be like, okay, now I've got like all these photos and all these stories, and walk into an office like the Walrus, and they're like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, well, I'm Rita. Do you want to see what I've done? And they're like, oh, okay. Hey, do you want to do a big feature story? But like that's kind of how it worked. These are some more pictures I took through having that access. Among the first photographs of detainees in Iraq at a time when the administration was denying that there was any opposition, in fact, to the conflict. These are more pictures from around that time, which was, very intense. I was there over a period of a year and a half for 10 months, so that was a long time. One of the people I met, I met these other photographers during that time, Cale Alford and Thorne Anderson, who are both extraordinary American artists, photojournalists. Thorne teaches at the University of Texas. Meeting them was transformative for sure because we put this book together and ultimately it was Cale and Thorne's idea. And Haith was the only Iraqi among us. And Haith's story, he has a biography out called A Stranger in My Own City, and it's unbelievable. And not only is his personal history, I think, the best take you could have, not just on the war in Iraq, but what can happen to cultures that have, been subjugated to these kinds of ongoing wars. And he went on to become one of the most decorated journalists of our time, actually. And he's also an extraordinary illustrator. So his book has illustrations in it, and he's working on a new book where he's going to fully be illustrating his work. And I'm very inspired by that too, by drawing. So right now, I'm not taking photographs anymore. I'm learning how to draw. But here are more of my pictures from that time. Um, so yeah, I am always straddling photojournalism and art. So maybe I had once thought I was going to be, a spot news war photographer, but that was not who I was. Like I always ended up doing these longer, more in-depth stories. So these are photographs of temporary grave markers, if you can believe it, in Iraq. And here again, I translated one of them. And because they find the bodies and they can't bury them because they're in the middle of war. So I made this grid out of these temporary grave markers. I can see time is kind of going. What time do we have to end technically?
Hey, you just roll. This is like
Okay.
riveting.
Okay. So another story I did in Iraq that was very I mean, they were all moving to me, but this one really was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever photographed or documented. And this is the Al Rashid Psychiatric Hospital in the women's ward in Baghdad during the war. And so these are some of the photographs I took there. I I visited about 30 times over 5 months. So imagine how many times I visited and was not allowed to take photographs every time. Like, of course, a huge amount of getting there was getting access, gaining trust of the doctors, of the patients. I mean, there were very kind doctors. All the staff were amazingly kind and dedicated to the patients. And they were really just responding to what my engagement with the patients was like. And if they thought that was a good thing, like that encouraged them to give me permission to be there. So this woman who and a lot of them had schizophrenia, and this woman whose name was Bushra, I spent a few nights actually. I stayed over at the hospital because sometimes it was just too dangerous to leave because it was right in the middle of a neighborhood that was under siege, as it happens, and in conflict with the Americans. It was called Sadr City, and a lot of the people who worked at the hospital, as it happened, as I later discovered, were part of the Sadr movement. But so I had to stay over at the hospital, and when I woke up one morning, this woman Bushra, who here I photographed her. I have happier pictures of her, but she actually recovered at that moment. I have no idea where she is now, but she left a note under my pillow, base a poem. She had written a poem and she left it under my pillow. And one of the things that she said, and that many of the women said, were, tell our stories because we will probably never leave this place. We have nowhere to go. And if you don't tell our stories, it's as if we never existed. And one of the things that happens, not surprisingly, during conflict is that supplies cannot get in. And so the most disadvantaged, vulnerable people are the most hurt very quickly. So imagine what's happening right now in the Middle East. If access to a hospital gets blocked off and they can't get the medication. So imagine this is a whole hospital of psychiatric patients, and this is what they've come down to with their meds. And like, if you know people on meds who maybe aren't even that sick, like meds are game changers. So you start taking meds away from people and it's horrific. So this is a woman named Mayada, and one day I was there on a sunny day, and it was often sunny. I don't know why I mentioned it was a sunny day. Maybe because it's cold here in Montreal, so I'm remembering. And and she came up to me and she noticed that I was quite strong, and she squeezed my arm and she said, "Oh, you've got really strong arms." She said, "I'm strong too. Do you want to see me do my exercises?" And I'm like, "Of course I want to see you do your exercises." So here she was showing me her exercises, and she had an incredibly heartbreaking story. She had been a concert pianist, and her husband was a terrible womanizer, and she suffered from terrible depression, and he couldn't take it, so he had her committed. And here she was and this, like, the staff at the hospital, confirmed these stories for me. So that was a very intense story. And also,
Rita, can I ask a quick question? So, did
yeah,
you work with an interpreter? Like, how were you able to
yes,
communicate? Okay,
yes,
thanks.
yeah,
I
I
didn't mean
had.
to interrupt, but I just
No,
wanted
no,
to
no. And
know.
and that's like you have to have a very special interpreter. And I was so lucky. I had two different women who I worked with, um, and who were very, again, they weren't professional journalists. They were like writers or academics who are in Iraq and have no work and start working as fixers, and who I had some kind of, relationship with, that they were interested in doing these stories with me because they could say no to doing certain stories. And if you don't have the right person, it's really not going to work either. So, yeah, so a woman named Tana was mostly translating through this story, so she got to know them very well. And then also the doctors all spoke English. And this woman, Mayada, spoke English and French, by the way, perfectly. And I speak French too, but she spoke, so she really was a woman of very high standing, and because she could speak perfect English and French, and obviously Arabic as well. So she was the only patient. There was one other patient who spoke some English. Otherwise, most of them came from poorer households. Um, and one day a bomb went off in the courtyard of the hospital, and the hospital ground shook. And my Anna looks at me, and I'm like, and I also, even though I also am used, you get used to hearing the explosions, and so I'm sure I, react. And she looks at me, and she goes, "Are you afraid?" And I'm like, "Well, kind of." And she goes, "Don't be afraid." She said, "I feel safe. We're safer in here than out there." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And that was like also as a metaphor for being in this place where, in a kind of a selfish way, here I am with these women who are really they're in one of the worst place you could well not but they're prisoners basically, and yet they found hope, like she said to me once, like, I hate war, these many wars. And she had, of course, because she was old enough, had lived through multiple wars. And she said, but I always have hope. She said, you have to find hope like a drowning person. So yeah, so that's Iraq. And now and then after that, I ended up teaching at the University of Toronto, part-time. I was teaching just the first half of the year, and then the other half of the year I would still work on stories. And I did that because I actually wanted to know more about the history of photojournalism, and the University of Toronto offered me whatever I wanted to teach. And I said, well, I don't want to teach photography, actually. I want to teach the history of photojournalism and documentary photography. And I have a bit of a beef with people who think that photojournalism and doc are not art. So, because I've always said, great photojournalism and great documentary is art. And just as great, any kind of conceptual photography is art. So if it's great, it's artful. And because it all requires a selection and a decision to be made. I mean, photography is not the real world, it is a representation. I mean, that's why we have representations and art. You have to make a selection, you have to have a concept, or it's meaningless. The concept is very important to it as well, or it's nothing, or it's just gibberish. So it's all got some kind of artifice around it as a way of making sense, right? And it's never perfect because it's always like an effort to tell a story. So through this time of studying the history of photojournalism and documentary photography, as well as my master's degree in literary theory and comparative literature in French and English, I was eventually invited to go to Afghanistan to be part of a social media experiment called Basetrack, where smartphones and Facebook and Twitter were going to be used in an embed situation for the first time in history. And as a historian by then, as well as photographer, I jumped on the opportunity to do this and only spent, only for me, very short, 5 weeks in Afghanistan, a very short time for me, shooting on an iPhone, which before I went there, I didn't know, and I'd never taken a picture on a phone. I had a flip phone. I didn't know what an app was. Like, this is only 2010, it's only 16 years ago. I didn't even know what an app was. And I dove in and I worked on this project. And at the end of it, I actually felt like it was kind of like it was interesting from a experimental perspective to see what could happen. But I also thought it was terrible because it was not in depth. It was very surface. We referred to getting stuff in the Twitter feed as feeding the beast. And so I was very unsatisfying, and I ended up coming out of it kind of traumatized because it occurred to me that the process of working on something in depth and getting involved with the people who you're documenting, I mean, not for a second to say that the trauma I'm undergoing is anything like the trauma they're undergoing, but still, like, the photographing and the writing about it is a form of therapy. And so, in this instance, because it was also quick and without personality, and aggressive, I have to say, and uh, deeply unpleasant in so many ways, I came back kind of shattered from it. And eventually I realized I needed to make something more of it. Well, actually, someone else asked me to. And I came up with this idea of looking at this experience through the lens of Canadian linguist and Marshall McLuhan, linguist and philosopher, who a lot of people probably never heard of, but he he's known for the saying the medium is the message, if that means anything to anybody. Woody Allen was a huge
Yeah.
fan. He
Yeah,
was in
we
one of Woody
knew. I
Allen's
just didn't
films.
know he was Canadian. That is like amazing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
not just that, but like the coach house where he held these famous lectures that
Yeah.
he used to hold. I could see it from my office
Oh
window at the
my
University of
God.
Toronto.
That,
And I didn't actually know much about McLuhan because he was always considered kind of flaky and he was into TV and media at a time when the institutions were interested in, high literature. Like they were not like McLuhan's like, no, we got to study television. We got to study technology. And so when he says the medium is the message, from this perspective of this social media embed, I'm like, oh my God, like, yeah, because the message becomes so much less important than the way it's being told and the medium that's telling it, the Facebook and the Twitter, and also the speed at which things start happening. So he starts talking about, he uses the term fast media. Long before the internet was existed, he's talking about fast media. So I spent 3 years working on this book, as it happens, a long time, using all this knowledge I had acquired and learning more and reading like crazy. And, if you think back to the Raleigh Flex, that was the first camera I ever looked through. And now I'm shooting on this phone and we're using this Hipstamatic app that, anyways, my book is all about this. And then the writing the book was kind of a therapy for me as well, right? And I call this book and talking about medians and social media and smartphones and this fast media, I call it semiological guerrilla warfare. So, which is a phrase taken from Umberto Eco. So to go back to Umberto Eco, who talks about semiotics and semiology. And so this idea that by analyzing semiotics, which Umberto Eco was doing, long before as well, that it is a form of well, obviously, it's argument. It's argument and polemic, and that you it's a way of telling a story not necessarily through the pictures, but using the pictures with the words. So the medium is the message, and what did I? So Marshall McLuhan also came up with this idea of the global village, which was the way in which media could bring people closer. And then now, again, 15 years ago, I call it the global village on speed. So if it was on speed 15 years ago, I don't know what the hell drugs were on now. So, okay. So, uh, after working on that project using a smartphone, I really want to go back to using big cameras and lighting and kind of go back to my roots. So before I started the tree planters, over that sort of decade period, I do a big project in Levant, in Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, and I'm using a big camera and I'm using lighting. And I come back from Palestine in 2015, back to Toronto, and I'm like angry and I'm depressed. And I had a moment and I just thought, I don't know if I want to do this kind of work anymore. And the whole time I'd been working or often when I was working in conflict zones, people would say to me, what prepared you for this kind of work? And I would say tree planting in Canada, which surprised people because they're thinking, well, tree planting doesn't sound very hard. So I had long been thinking one day I want to go back and do a story that really shows what tree planting is, but more like in a way that I never could have told it when I was a tree planter. Like I tree planted 20 years before. I'd learned all these things in between. I'd been through all of these things in between. And suddenly, this project about tree planting was something that could represent everything I had ever done and everything I was, in the way that our art is everything we are, the good and the bad. Maybe the bad even more importantly, I don't know. But so this film is it's about a community of tree planters, but it's very autobiographical as well, not in a necessarily straightforward way, but it's telling my story through other people. And actually art should do that anyways, because unless you're telling a story that has enough universal impact, it's not going to mean anything to anyone else. So you can look at pictures of women in a psychiatric hospital in Baghdad and feel more than just empathy and pity for them. Like you can relate to them on some level because they're so humanized. And so this project, was that for me. Um, and I knew going in, I was going to take out all the stops. I knew I was going to make a film, which I did film, a book. This is my trailer. I finally got to be Dorothea Lange, but I've got a trailer and a Jeep. This is all the shit we have to carry, lights. This is one of the camps. And so this is all being shot on a medium format camera with a strobe light that my assistant is holding onto the strobe light with a big softbox on it. Actually, you can see it there with a Profoto light connected to me by a radio transmitter. And look at the terrain. We're like, you have to be really good on your feet to plant trees and also to photograph tree planters. You have to be really good on your feet. Um, So everywhere I went, she's with me with the light, and that's why this work has this very painterly feeling to it. I don't know. Okay, I'll show you this video. This is a little video clip, but little arrow is in the way.
You're out in the block all by yourself and you don't see anybody all day. All you have are your trees and your land. And I always thought that everyone else was planting more than me and going faster than me. And that would push me. And I would just be like, you're too slow. You're too slow. Everybody's ahead of you. And I would just like work and work and work. And at the end of the day, I would feel like I had just fucking blown it and I was a complete loser. And then I would go home or get on the bus and find out that, not only like maybe I'd even highballed the camp. And it's a strange kind of motivating thing, the sense that you're never doing good enough. So there's always a sense of urgency and you always have in your gut this kind of feeling that you have to work harder and better and you have to be more prepared for every moment. And it's one tree at a time. You keep going regardless of feeling discouraged. You just can't let yourself think about that. It's just the next thing, plant the next tree. And at the end of the day, you've planted all your bags, you've filled in some land, you've made some money, and you plant trees for 10 years and you've planted a forest.
So there you can see how the pictures are made. Now, a lot of people, when they look at these photographs, they think they're done they think they're posed. So it was important to me in the film to show how the work is made because it's never about posing for me, first of all, but it's a whole different beast. The lifelikeness of it, the action of it, the motion of it. I mean, no one could actually pose this way, but it's really important how it's made. And then of course I'm approaching it. I've got, big visual vocabulary like we all do. So this photograph, for instance, you can see the Caravaggio chiaroscuro type lighting. I mean, they're so similar. But of course, I've got that in my head when I'm working, right? It's not an accident that happened. And another influence is skiing. And when I was a kid, this is one of the posters on the wall of my bedroom. And I'm looking at tree planters like athletes and see how they have that athletic pose. So there's also this thing of the skiers in motion. So it's also a kind of sports photography with this Renaissance aspect to it. And then, of course, I'm also trying to heroicize these young people. It happens that they're planting trees, and planting trees has never been as respected as cutting trees. And actually the whole tree planting industry is complicated now. It's involved in the logging industry. That's a big other story. But for me, it's this focus on youth and determination and hopefulness, and that, you plant trees, you get through your day one tree at a time because it is such grueling work. And then the parallel story is you make a documentary film or any kind of long form documentary project one picture at a time. You always start with an empty notebook and an empty camera. You can spend months preparing your gear and it's empty. And there's something like that. Like if you've read Moby Dick and he goes on and on about the whiteness of the whale that abhors him, and which is also a metaphor for an artist looking at a blank page. And having all your technology with no photographs in it yet is like that too. So, and then, I love to participate in the community on so many levels. Of course, I'm very close to many of these tree planters still. But one day I'd gone back to Toronto to make prints to make sure, first of all, the tech is working, and hung them up on buses around the camp, and they came in off the block. And even though they knew I told them what I was doing, until they saw the prints, they couldn't believe it. And, taped this one up to my trailer. That's some of the gear and the prints.
Wait, did you have a printer with you?
No, no, I went back to Toronto to have prints
Oh,
made.
okay. God, I was
Yeah,
like,
which I
geez.
did every season. So say the season is 4 months. I would go home, I would fly, like I would drive
Robert.
to British Columbia, which took 8 days with my trailer and my Jeep and all my gear. And then halfway through, I would go back to Toronto and make test prints to make sure that everything was as it should be. Because you'd be, and then that one, this was like this was the third of 4 years. I came back with these prints and hung them up on the around camp. Look at all the gas cans as well, too, right? Because we're out pretty far from the closest town. And when you're embedding with the community, like you don't want to be trouble. And so I couldn't rely on them for fuel. And I needed fuel for my generator, which is how I charged all my batteries. And I needed extra fuel because sometimes you're out there and maybe you want to go and do that one more shoot before heading back to the gas station that's like a 2.5 hour drive away. There's so much logistics involved, which of course I had learned a lot of working in conflict zones. And when I worked in tree planting before that as a tree planter and then also as a foreman, I had learned skills that helped me work in conflict zones and then increased those skills working in conflict zones and then brought it all back to the cut block. So it really was full circle. So, and then I'll just end very quickly showing you a couple of pictures. During the pandemic, I was determined to make work again as a historian, photographer historian. I knew there was no way I was going to sit out the pandemic not making work, come hell or high water. I was going to make art as much as possible with the limits possible. I couldn't leave Toronto. I lived alone. I couldn't be closer than 6 feet to anybody. I started going on walks with friends, and I brought lighting equipment with me, and I did these social distance portraits, which were also opportunities to get dressed up. So this is my friend John Bora, who's an extraordinary singer-songwriter. John Bora, you can find him on the internet and on Spotify for sure. Uh, and so Johnny, I asked Johnny Bora if he'd be part of this project with me, and he said, "How should I dress?" And I said, "Dress like it's an album cover, and I'll dress like a groupie." So there I am, dressed like a groupie, and here are some other good friends of mine. And see how I'm dressed like my friend Franco? Like I would compare notes, and so it was playful. And for me, it really was like it saved me because it enabled me to connect with people. It cheered people up. It couldn't last very long because you couldn't use their bathroom if you were at their house. Had to be close to people's houses. And I carried everything in my bike and my pannier. So I basically got little light stands and speed lights, and my camera went on like anything breakable went in my backpack, and the heavy shit went in my panniers. And I'd have to be able to get there by bike. Here's me and another musician friend, Kevin Quain, another extraordinary musician who did the soundtrack for my film, by the way, on the roof of the Cameron House in Toronto. So there are like all these this is me and my sister and her husband who are fanatic skiers. So ski, I went on to become all these other things, and my sister, well, who also became other things, skiing has remained the most important thing in her life. So she and Danielle, her husband, are just blow anybody away skiing. And so of course my picture with them, we had to be skiing. And then this is, sometimes it's groups of people. So these are friends of mine who, the son lived in Montreal, so he wasn't in their bubble because the pictures also represent bubbles, right? So me, I'm always alone because I'm single. So I'm always alone. And then other families might be together, or couples might be together, or children who live in other cities who come to visit are separate. And then these are friends of mine who have three kids, and Xavier Debon and Sarah Martin and their kids. And Xavier got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer the first week of the pandemic. And so they spent the pandemic with him really ill, trips to the hospital, which was very complicated, three kids of school age living at home. And this was now a year and a bit later, the second pandemic spring, when things were lifting. He had been cleared of all his cancer, and I wanted to do this picture but we're still social distancing, and do a picture where it's symbolized by planting and growth and gardening. So, and I did another pandemic project too, but I think like that's like, yeah, this was the last one. I did another whole project where I shot at night, and this was a whole other thing. Um, and by the way, this work, like I can't get galleries really terribly interested in it. And but speaking of galleries, Stephen Bulger, who represents me in Toronto, he gave me and my friend Don McKellar, who collaborated on this with me, a show during the pandemic that hardly anyone saw, of course, because it was during the pandemic. And yeah, and without my gallerist is one of the most important people in my life now. So very lucky to have Stephen. So there's Stephen, and I know I went pretty long,
Oh,
but I think that's
Rita,
all I
wasn't
have
this
for you.
amazing? Are you kidding? I mean, there's so much more. I didn't know all of this, first of all. I'm just like, I didn't know all of this. That book you did was incredible. I can't wait to buy it. And I can't wait to go back and reread Echo's semiotics, right? Because we've got so much to talk about. Rebecca and Ms. Chen, do you all have questions? Did you get all your questions answered? Looks like they're good. I do. I have a question. So, how did you originally find out about the hospital in Iraq? The where the women were, how did you locate that hospital?
So I was actually I was just going on a day shoot with my friend Barbara Davidson, who
Mm.
I'm sure you know, she's an incredible photojournalist, a multiple Pulitzer Prize winner, and she was a staffer for I want to say I should know this, Dallas maybe,
Yeah, Dallas Morning News.
yeah, and and so I went with her. We went together to check out this hospital because there had been a big story around it because during the initial phases of the war, the hospital got bombed and everyone evacuated, and the patients got loose. And it's a weird way to put it, but that's how it was put to us. And they were roaming the streets without meds and a place to stay. And and a couple of the nurses and doctors took them into their own homes. And so now it was later, and the hospital was reopening. And so Barbara and I went together, and then Barbara, moved on to other stories. And I stayed another year almost, and decided that that was something I wanted to spend more time on.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You can really
It's
see
like
that you spent time on that, like from the few photos and just hearing your story. So I appreciate that.
I mean, and
Rebe-
that's how it goes. Like, Barbara, who also does a lot of long-term projects, it's like you start with something, maybe it's an assignment, and then if it sort of grabs you or you have a connection to it, you see, maybe it turns into something much, much longer. I mean, you have no idea. I sure didn't know the first year I went tree planting that 30
Mhm.
years later, because this project, the tree plant, it's like touring Canada right now, and it just kind of keeps going. And now I'm a little bit tired actually. And as you know,
I wish
as
we
you
could
know,
get it down
I
here.
broke my arm skiing 8 weeks
Oh,
ago. So I'm now recovering, but yeah.
girl. Now, if you were Rebecca's asking if you were gonna go back to the Middle East, where would you go? What would your focus be?
Uh,
There's a lot now. I mean, or is it even our
yeah.
place to go? You know what I'm saying?
It's such a different time. And like when I
Yeah.
read, like reading Khaith Abdul Ahad's book, for
Hmm.
instance,
Hmm.
like I I'm not really sure what I could contribute.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
it's also because of where I am in my life. Like I'm so far removed now, and
Hmm.
um I I mean, I would have, of course, wanted to go to Gaza, but a journalist
Yeah.
couldn't go. Like that to me, that would have been, find a way to go to Gaza
Yeah.
to have witnesses.
Yeah.
Um, now, like, yeah, you'd probably want to go to Tehran, and even if it's in a support role to local journalists, I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's something that could change, like going, and because I was never really working in the media, the big media cycle, but
Hmm.
because of course there are still photojournalists who've been working since before I started who are doing these stories, right? Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
um,
But very few, Rita.
but very few because,
Yeah.
well, first of all, no one, it's the machinery isn't in place for it. I mean, um, I mean, I think I was weirdly lucky that I was never invested in being a staffer for
Yeah.
anybody because when that ended, nothing had ended for me. And in fact, because I'd never had it, I'd always had to have my hands in other places. So
Mhm.
I was doing conceptual work, I was having exhibitions, there were photojournalists who were like, well, you're not a photojournalist because you're an artist. And then there were art photographers saying you're
I
not an
know.
artist,
You're not
you're a
a
photo. I still
artist.
get that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, our whole lives, people want to put us in boxes, right? Oh, you're a girl, you're this kind of this, you're this
You're a
kind of that,
kooky person.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go,
Yeah, me
but
neither. Yeah. Well, listen, just thank you so much. Was fascinating.
I think
And
what if I were still shooting, I would
yeah.
be doing what people like, my friend Stephanie Keith is doing in New York, and
Yeah.
John Trotter and Q Sakamaki, like the long-term
Stay in the
photojournalists who are
hallway.
photographing the
Okay.
demonstrations to witness and to prove that there is in fact opposition, because this is the thing that when we were in Iraq too, like photographing the Muddy Army, while the administration was like just saying, oh, there's no opposition. And here we are in the middle of firefights. And,
Yeah.
when Bezos shut down photojournalism and the Washington Post, people were like, oh, I can't believe he would do that. It wouldn't cost that much. It's like, of course he did it. He
Oh, yeah.
wanted to
I
do
mean,
it.
because it's without visual journalism, there is no democracy.
Without visual journalism, there is no democracy. And,
No,
you
not that there
know,
is anyway, but that's another five
and also
hour
like, so what
talk.
do I do with my time? I say yes to Judy Walgren when she asked me to come
Goddess
talk,
Rita. God, thank you so much. Rebecca says the COVID shots have, yeah, I agree. Rebecca, that is great. Rebecca says that the COVID shots have a Norman Rockwell combo, filmmaker, Wes Anderson quality. Yeah, I thought the same thing. Rebecca, you are so, I can't wait to meet you.
Hmm.
I have the same feeling. Like they had that kind of
I made, I made, I
Americana-esque.
made, I have over 50 of them, if you can believe it.
Oh my God.
Because
Well,
when it started, we all just thought, oh, it's just going to be a couple of months.
I
I had no
know.
idea it would cycle through. multiple seasons. I mean, it was the same with the Infinite Distance project, which cycles
I
through
love that
seasons,
photo. Yeah,
right?
I love
And
it.
like this picture here, it's shot on Toronto Island, so off
Mhm.
well, I'm in Montreal right now, but I borrowed these little tents from friends and I had these battery powered light. Like, of course, it's all staged and set up. We're not sleeping out in tents in the middle of a snowstorm, but we had a plan, and all the gear was
Yeah.
ready to go. And when the weather report said snowstorm, I'm like, okay, we're getting on the ferry. We're going to the island. We are now going to shoot like crazy in the middle of this insane snowstorm because our two characters, like the idea was it was me and Dawn, and we're like the two last people on Earth in an apocalypse, and we're
Yeah.
just, traveling around a city that is familiar but strange because like so many people did, right? Like it's set in Toronto, but so many people experienced this where the familiar became so strange and where nature was encroaching on the urban and it was also disorienting. And I mean, I hope that there's a time when institutions want to really you know like celebrate is not the wrong word, to like celebrate the artistic movement and impetus of artists to handle times like this because like the Canterbury Tales was written during a pandemic. Like so
Yeah,
many of
it's
the most
true.
important works of art were created during plagues and pandemic. And of course, I was reading about that, right? I'm like, wow, I was
Mhm.
reading everything I could about plagues, and I was just like, well, some people, artists or whatever, were like, I'm just going to go to sleep and wait for it to pass. I'm going to pretend like I'm sick. I'm like, no, maybe that's the
I'm
photojournalist
gonna
in us.
pretend like I'm sick.
I mean, with photojournalism, you can't wait
Oh
because it
my
could end. So
God.
it's like hit the ground, bang, bang, like
Yeah.
work, 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 work. And for us as creative people, like that's also how it keeps us from despairing because it's
Hmm.
easy to despair,
Yeah.
very easy to despair.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Hmm.
All right, Rita, super goddess. God, thank you so much.
You're a super goddess.
I just really appreciate it. And I can't wait to see you up there.
Me too.
Thanks a lot for coming, Cynthia and Rebecca, you amazing human beings as well. Let me stop sharing if I can, or stop